We're going to take a look now at a few tips to help you with your push pressing. The first one that we're going to look at is making sure that your elbow stays connected to your body on that first dip. This enables you to use your legs properly to power the lift, and it prevents you from using too much of your upper body, which defeats the purpose of push pressing. So here we go. If Rowan's doing it correctly, you can see that on that first dip his elbow remains connected to his body. This way he can use his legs to generate energy that will travel up through his elbow and launch the kettlebell off his hip. If he does it incorrectly and breaks at the hip, which a lot of people will want to do, particularly if they've been using barbells, he's now reducing his ability to use his legs, and it defeats the purpose of doing a push press. So, make sure that elbow stays connected to your body on the first dip, and it could take a little bit of practice. Next thing that we're going to look at is making sure that your heels stay on the ground, particularly during that first dip. So if Rowan does it correctly, his heels will remain planted and he will actually drive up through the heels, just like when you're coming up out of the squat. So that makes for a more powerful leg drive, which makes for a better push press. If he does it incorrectly and comes up onto his toes, lifts his heels off the ground, first of all, he's destabilising himself, which is not a good thing. Second of all, he's now putting too much pressure through his knee joint, which is not very good. So make sure that the heels remain firmly planted on the ground during that first dip. Next thing that we're going to look at is making sure that the knees track in line with the toes and don't buckle in. If they're buckling in, again, not very good for your knees. So if Rowan does a couple correctly, you'll see that his knees track directly in line with his toes. If he does it incorrectly, you'll see his knees collapsing. Obviously not very good and not very comfortable, so you want to watch out for that one. The next thing that you want to be aware of is just making sure that you sink into the first dip and then drive up quickly with the legs. This is an explosive lift. You don't want to be doing it slowly and trying to grind through it. So if Rowan does it correctly, you'll see that it's quick. He sinks into that first dip and then he springs back up into that leg extension to help power the kettlebell moving overhead. So it's nice and quick and it's nice and fluid. If he does it incorrectly, if he tries to grind through it, it's too slow and he's not getting enough leg power into it. When he goes to do something heavier, that will really be an obstacle. The next thing that you want to look at is making sure that you really understand your pressing path and your overhead lockout position. And this usually means that you've done a good amount of just straight overhead pressing before you move on to the push press. If you understand your pressing path, so making sure that your elbow travels vertically, all that sort of stuff, and you know your overhead lockout position very well, then you'll be able to fixate much more quickly because you'll know exactly when to stop the kettlebell. So if Rowan does it correctly, you'll see how quickly he gets the kettlebell up there, how straight his elbow moves up, and how fast he can fixate as a result. If he starts doing anything weird like bringing his arm out to the side or anything like that, this will hinder his ability to fixate properly, and in this case will also start to put a little bit too much pressure on the shoulder joint. So basically make sure that your overhead press is really good before you go on to push pressing. Last thing that we're going to look at is just holding the kettlebell overhead for a second on every rep. This really helps to build that shoulder stability and in fact all over body strength, rather than just dropping the kettlebell as soon as it gets up there. So if Rowan does a good rep, holds it up there for a second and brings it back down again. Maybe you can take an extra breath overhead and bring it back down. And like I said, this will really help build that shoulder stability. What you don't want to be doing is doing up and then letting it drop down. So if Rowan does a couple of bad reps, and this again comes down to a lack of fixation. If he comes up and then drops it down, that one there is exactly what you don't want to do because you're basically not getting any of the benefits of the push press by trying to rush through it and do it too quickly. So there you go, there are some tips that will hopefully help you get a really good kettlebell push press.